I didn't cheat on my husband because I stopped loving him. I cheated because one day I realized I no longer felt alive. And the worst part was, he was not at fault in any way. Part 1. When I realized I was disappearing. I didn't cheat on my husband the night I touched another man. I cheated on him months earlier, maybe years, when I stopped telling him the truth about how quiet I'd become inside. But that's not how I understood it then. At the time, all I knew was that something in me had gone still. Like a room in a house no one entered anymore. The lights were off. The air was stale. And I was the only one who noticed. If you'd asked anyone else, they would have said I was fine. Better than fine. I was married to a good man. The kind of man people describe using words like steady and reliable, as if those qualities alone can keep a heart beating. We had a house that always smelled faintly of laundry detergent and coffee. We had routines that fit together cleanly. We had friends who envied us because we didn't fight in public and never posted passive-aggressive quotes online. On paper I was safe. In real life I was fading. My husband, Mark, had a way of moving through the world that made things seem handled. He folded the towels the same way every time. He replaced the batteries in the smoke detector before it ever chirped. He kissed me on the forehead when he left for work and texted me when he was on his way home so I wouldn't worry. He loved me in a language made of consistency. I used to speak that language fluently. Early on I found it comforting, proof that love didn't have to be chaotic to be real. I'd grown up watching my parents hurt each other loudly, dramatically. Like love was something you survived instead of lived. Mark felt like an antidote to that. With him there were no slammed doors. No guessing games. No nights spent staring at the ceiling wondering where you stood. So when the quiet inside me began, I assumed it was normal. Marriage settles, everyone says that. Passion turns into partnership. Fire turns into embers. I told myself that if I waited long enough I'd adjust. That adulthood was learning how to live without intensity. But the truth was more uncomfortable. I didn't miss excitement. I missed myself. Started with small things. I stopped singing in the car. Not consciously. I just realized one day that the radio had been playing and my mouth hadn't moved. I used to sing badly and loudly, windows down, voice cracking on the high notes. Mark used to laugh and turn the volume up so I wouldn't hear myself. Somewhere along the way, I started turning the volume down instead. I stopped wearing the red dress. The one that made me feel like a woman who took up space instead of apologizing for it. I told myself it wasn't practical. Too tight. Too noticeable. I started choosing clothes that blended in, soft colors, forgiving fabrics. Outfits that said don't look too long. At night when Mark touched me, I let him. That's important to say. I never pushed him away. I never said no. But I wasn't really there either. I was polite. Presentable. Responsive in the way you are when you're being graded on effort, not desire. Sometimes I watched myself from above, like a woman performing the role of a wife in a quiet play. I knew my cues. I hit my marks. I smiled at the right moments. Afterward, Mark would fall asleep quickly, breathing deep and even, one arm thrown across my waist like a claim. I would lie there awake, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering when touch had stopped feeling like electricity and started feeling like obligation. I never told him any of this. How do you explain to someone who hasn't done anything wrong that you're still unhappy? How do you say you didn't hurt me but I'm hurting anyway? So I said nothing. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself other women would kill for this life. I told myself that wanting more made me ungrateful. That was my first betrayal. The second came when I started noticing how invisible I'd become. To myself mostly, but also to the world. At the grocery store I watched the way men looked through me, not at me. I wasn't offended. I was unsettled. I couldn't remember the last time someone's eyes had lingered, curious. Not hungry, just interested. Like I was a person worth registering. At work I was competent, dependable. The one who handled things quietly. No one worried about me. No one checked in. I was the woman you could forget about without consequences. I told myself that was a compliment. Then one afternoon, months before the affair, I had a moment that felt like a warning I chose to ignore. I was alone in the house folding laundry. Sunlight came through the living room window in a thin, dusty beam. One of Mark's shirts was warm from the dryer, and as I lifted it, the smell of his soap, clean, familiar, hit me. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, I started crying. Not sobbing. Not dramatically. Just quiet tears dripping onto the fabric in my hands. I stood there holding his shirt, feeling like I was mourning something I couldn't name. I remember thinking, if this is my life forever, I don't know how to survive it. That thought scared me enough that I stuffed it down immediately. I told myself I was tired. Hormonal. Dramatic. I finished the laundry, wiped my face, and went on with my day. That's how I learned to disappear politely. The man I eventually slept with, Evan, entered my life in the least dramatic way possible. No lightning. No instant chemistry. No moment where the universe seemed to whisper this will ruin you. He was a consultant brought in to help with a short-term project at work. Temporary. Unthreatening. He wore scuffed boots with dress pants and drank his coffee black. He listened when people spoke, not in a performative way but like he was actually storing the information somewhere. The first thing he ever said to me was, "You think before you answer." Caught me off guard. I laughed and said something self-deprecating, because that's what I did when I didn't know how to respond to being seen. But the comment stayed with me. Over the next few weeks we worked together closely. Long meetings. Shared documents. Quiet moments waiting for elevators. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing obvious. If anyone had asked, I would have said he was just a coworker. And that would have been true. Except for the way my body reacted to his attention. He asked questions that weren't just about the work. Not personal ones, curious ones. What I thought. Why I'd chosen a certain approach. How I saw the bigger picture. When I spoke, he didn't interrupt or finish my sentences. He waited. One afternoon we were the last two in the conference room. Everyone else had filtered out, chairs scraping, phones buzzing. I was packing up my bag when he said casually, "You know, you don't shrink when you're explaining something. It's like you forget to." I froze. I laughed it off again. But inside something shifted. Because he was right. With Mark, with friends, with the world, I had learned how to make myself smaller without anyone asking. Softer. Easier. Less likely to need things. With Evan, I spoke and took up space without realizing it. My hands moved when I talked. My voice changed. I felt awake. That terrified me. I went home that night and kissed my husband harder than usual. I cooked his favorite dinner. I laughed at his jokes. I tried to anchor myself back into the life I was supposed to want. But later, lying in bed beside him, I stared at the dark and felt something unbearable settle in my chest. Wanting wasn't the problem. Being numb was. And for the first time, a thought crossed my mind that felt both dangerous and honest. If I don't do something, anything, I'm going to disappear completely. I didn't know then that I'd already started down a path I couldn't undo. I just knew that somewhere inside me, a woman who used to feel alive was knocking on the walls, asking to be let out. And I didn't know how much damage it would take to hear her again. Part 2. The space between touches. There's a lie people tell themselves about infidelity, that it begins with a kiss. Doesn't. It begins with permission. Not the kind you ask for out loud, but the quiet kind you grant yourself when no one is watching. Permission to linger. Permission to imagine. Permission to not shut something down the moment it starts to feel good. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to betray my husband. I woke up every morning deciding not to look too closely at what I was already doing. After Evan's comment about me not shrinking, I became hyper-aware of myself around him. Not in a self-conscious way. More like I was noticing a version of me I hadn't seen in years. I laughed more easily. I disagreed out loud. I didn't apologize before speaking. It was intoxicating in the most mundane way. Nothing happened right away. That's the part people don't understand when they imagine affairs as sudden, reckless explosions. This was erosion. Slow. Almost polite. We started sitting next to each other in meetings without planning it. Our chairs just ended up close. Our arms brushed occasionally, accidental enough to be deniable, electric enough to replay later. We exchanged emails that were technically about work but didn't need to be. Comments that could have waited until the next meeting but didn't. Inside jokes about shared frustrations. Observations about people we both noticed but didn't say out loud. I told myself it was harmless because it was subtle. Mark, meanwhile, was steady as ever. He asked me how my day was. He listened. He kissed me when he got home. We ate dinner together most nights, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about plans or money or what show we were watching. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside me, everything had. I started thinking about Evan at odd moments, brushing my teeth, waiting at stoplights, lying next to my husband in the dark. Not sexually at first. Emotionally. Curiously. Like turning over a stone to see what's underneath. I wondered what it would feel like to tell him things I never said out loud anymore. I wondered if he'd notice when I went quiet, or if he'd ask why. That curiosity should have been my cue to step back. Instead, I leaned in. One evening, a few of us from work went out for drinks after a long day. It was casual, unplanned. The kind of thing that feels innocent because there are other people around, because the lights are bright, because no one's alone. I told Mark I'd be late. He told me to have fun. At the bar, I had 2 glasses of wine, just enough to loosen something, not enough to excuse it. Evan stood next to me most of the night. We talked about music, about where we grew up, about the ways life had turned out differently than we'd expected. At one point, he asked me if I was happy. It wasn't a loaded question. It wasn't flirtatious. It was quiet, almost absent-minded, like he was genuinely curious and not expecting a real answer. I said yes. The lie tasted strange in my mouth. Later, as people filtered out and the night thinned, we ended up outside together, waiting for separate rides. The air was cool. The city hummed around us. For a moment we stood in silence. Then he said softly, "You don't sound happy." My heart started racing, not because he was wrong, but because he was close enough to hear it. I shrugged, smiled, did what I always did. "I'm just tired." He nodded like he accepted that. But he didn't step away. Nothing happened that night. No kiss. No confession. Just a moment where neither of us moved. Where something heavy and unnamed hung between us. When his ride came, he hesitated before leaving. "Good night," he said. Not "see you tomorrow." Not "take care." Just "good night." I watched him go and felt something hollow open in my chest. On the drive home, I rehearsed what I'd say if Mark asked how it went. I didn't need to. He was half asleep when I came in, already drifting. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, my mind buzzing. I should have stopped then. Instead, I started telling myself a new story. That this wasn't about Evan. That it was about me. That as long as I didn't cross a physical line, I wasn't doing anything wrong. That's the most dangerous lie of all. Because emotional distance doesn't leave marks you can point to. It doesn't look like betrayal from the outside. It looks like distraction. Like daydreaming. Like being somewhere else while still in the room. I started pulling away in small, justifiable ways. I stayed late at work more often. I brought my phone into the bathroom. I took longer walks alone. Mark noticed, but gently. "You okay?" he'd ask. "You seem a little off." I kissed his cheek. "Just busy." And maybe I was. Busy constructing a version of myself that didn't feel like she was disappearing. Evan and I started messaging outside of work. First it was articles. Music recommendations. Things that felt neutral enough to share with anyone. Then it wasn't. It became checking in. "How was your day? Did that meeting go okay? You seemed quiet earlier." No hearts. No compliments. No obvious lines crossed. But he noticed me. And I let him. One afternoon we were working late, the office mostly empty. The lights were dimmed automatically, casting everything in a softer glow. We sat across from each other, laptops open, not really working. He asked me about Mark. About my marriage. I told him safe things. How long we'd been together. That he was kind. That we were stable. He listened, then said, "You talk about him like he's a good man." "He is," I said quickly. "But," he asked, not pushing, just leaving space. I stared at my screen. The cursor blinked, waiting. "I don't know who I am anymore," I said finally. It felt like stepping off a ledge. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He didn't offer solutions. He just nodded like that made sense. "I get that," he said. Something in his voice, recognition maybe, made my eyes sting. That was the moment I crossed the line. Not because I touched him. Because I let myself be understood by someone who wasn't my husband. From then on, the pull was undeniable. Every interaction carried weight. Every shared look felt loaded. We were careful, but we were also aware. One night, weeks later, he walked me to my car after another late evening. The parking garage was nearly empty, concrete echoing our footsteps. We stopped by my car. The air felt thick, charged. He looked at me like he was about to say something important. Then he stopped himself. "I don't want to make this complicated," he said quietly. My heart pounded. "Neither do I." But neither of us moved away. For a split second I imagined leaning in. Imagine the shock of it. The release. The way it would shatter the careful balance I'd been pretending to maintain. Instead I opened my car door. "Good night," I said. He smiled, sad and knowing. "Good night." I drove home shaking. I told myself I was strong for stopping. I told myself this proved I had control. What I didn't admit was how badly I wished I hadn't. That night, Mark wrapped his arm around me in his sleep. His touch was familiar, safe, loving. And I lay there awake, my chest aching with a want I didn't know how to name anymore. I wasn't in love with Evan, but I was awake around him. And once you feel that after a long time of numbness, it's almost impossible to forget. By the time I realized I was already in too deep, I'd stopped asking myself whether I should turn back. I was only wondering what it would cost me if I didn't. Part 3. The moment I stopped pretending. I wish I could say there was a clear moment when I made a decision. A point where I stood at a crossroads and consciously chose the wrong path. But that's not how it happened. What happened instead was exhaustion. Of resisting, of managing myself, of constantly reminding my own body to stay in its place. I was tired of being vigilant. Tired of monitoring my thoughts like they were contraband. Tired of waking up every day pretending I wasn't starving for something I couldn't even name properly. Desire is patient when it has to be. And when you ignore it long enough, it learns how to wait quietly until you're weakest. The night it finally happened wasn't dramatic. No storm outside. No grand confessions. No music swelling in the background. It was a Tuesday. The most unremarkable night of the week. Mark had a late dinner with a client. He told me in advance, kissed my cheek, apologized for the schedule like he always did even though he didn't need to. I told him it was fine. I meant it. At work, Evan and I had stayed late again. The project deadline was looming. And the office emptied out early, leaving behind that strange after-hours stillness that makes everything feel more intimate than it should. We were in a small conference room this time. Just us. Papers spread across the table. Coffee gone cold. The lights dimmed automatically again, like the building itself was conspiring. We weren't talking much. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy. Charged. A silence full of everything we hadn't said for weeks. I caught him looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Not in a way that felt predatory or aggressive. In a way that felt careful. Like he was holding something fragile and didn't know where to set it down. Finally he spoke. "I think we need to talk about this." My stomach dropped. My pulse spiked. "About what?" I asked even though we both knew. He exhaled slowly. "About us pretending this is nothing." I stared at the table. My hands were shaking. I folded them together to hide it. "I'm married," I said quietly. "I know," he replied. No argument. No pushback. Just acknowledgement. "That should be enough," I added. It sounded like I was trying to convince myself. "It should," he said. "But it doesn't feel like it is." I looked up at him then. Really looked. His eyes were steady, conflicted, not triumphant. That mattered more than it should have. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I said. "I don't either," he said. And that's when I realized the danger. Because neither of us sounded like liars. We sat there for a long moment, the hum of the building filling the space between us. I thought about Mark, his predictability, his kindness, the way he trusted me without hesitation. I thought about how safe my life was. And then I thought about how dead I felt inside it. "I don't recognize myself anymore," I said suddenly. The words spilled out before I could stop them. I wake up and go through the motions and everyone thinks I'm fine. I look fine. But I feel like I'm watching my own life instead of living it. Evan didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened. "I don't want to be the woman who cheats," I continued, my voice breaking. "I don't want to hurt my husband. But I also don't know how to keep pretending that everything is enough when it isn't." He stood up slowly. Not toward me, away. Like he was giving me space. Like he was giving me an out. "This doesn't have to happen," he said. "We can walk away." I nodded. I knew he was right. But my body didn't move. Instead, I stood too. The room felt suddenly smaller. The air thicker. I don't know how to walk away from myself anymore, I said. That was the truth. The whole terrifying truth. He looked at me then, really looked at me like he was seeing all of it, the fear, the longing, the fracture down the middle of me. If we cross this line, he said carefully, there's no pretending afterward. I don't want to be another thing you regret. I stepped closer. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I already regret not feeling alive, I said. Every day. That was the moment. Not the kiss. The moment I admitted what I was choosing. When he kissed me, it was gentle. Almost tentative. Like he was still giving me time to pull away. I didn't. The first thing I noticed was how present I felt. Every nerve awake. Every thought sharpened. It wasn't fireworks, it was clarity. I kissed him back like someone who had been underwater too long. We didn't rush. We didn't fumble. We moved slowly, reverently, like we both understood the weight of what we were doing. And yet, this is the part that haunts me. It felt right in a way that scared me more than guilt ever could. When it was over, the room felt different. Quieter. Like something irreversible had settled into place. I didn't cry. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt awake. That realization hit me harder than anything else. I drove home in silence, hands tight on the steering wheel. My reflection in the windshield looked unfamiliar, brighter maybe. Or sharper. I couldn't tell. Mark was asleep when I came in. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a long time, watching him breathe. I expected to feel crushed by guilt. Instead, I felt split in two. I showered longer than necessary, scrubbing my skin like I could wash off the knowledge of what I'd done. When I finally slid into bed, Mark stirred and pulled me close without waking. His arm around me felt the same as it always had. And yet I felt like a stranger lying next to him. I stared into the dark, my heart racing, my mind spinning. I had crossed the line I swore I never would. Not because I loved someone else, but because for the first time in years I felt unmistakably, undeniably alive. And once you feel that, truly feel it, the question stops being should I do this again? It becomes how do I live with myself now that I have? Part 4, Living in the After. The guilt didn't arrive immediately. That's something no one tells you. That sometimes it's late. Sometimes it lets you breathe first. Sometimes it waits until you've convinced yourself you're not the kind of person who feels it. For a few days after that night, I moved through the world with a strange heightened clarity. Colors seemed sharper. Sounds landed deeper. I laughed more easily. I caught my reflection in windows and mirrors and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. Not because she looked different, but because she looked awake. Terrified me how good that felt. Mark noticed, of course. He always noticed changes in weather, in routines, in me. He told me I seemed lighter. Happier. He squeezed my hand across the kitchen counter and said, "It's nice to see you like this again." Again. That word cut deeper than any accusation could have. I smiled. I leaned into him. I let him believe he was the reason. That night, lying beside him, I waited for the guilt to crush me. I waited for panic, for regret, for the kind of shame movies promise will descend like punishment. Instead, my mind drifted back to Evan. His voice, the way he listened, the stillness of that room. I hated myself for not hating myself more. The messages started the next day. Nothing explicit. Nothing reckless. Are you okay? I've been thinking about you. If this complicates things too much, say the word. I stared at my phone for a long time before responding. I'm okay, I typed. Just trying to understand what I'm feeling. That was the truth. Or part of it. What I didn't say was that I felt like I'd cracked something open inside myself and couldn't close it again. We didn't see each other for a week. Work schedules shifted. Meetings changed. Maybe we were both testing our resolve. Maybe we were both scared of how easy it would be to fall back into that space together. During that week, the guilt finally found me. It came in quiet moments, watching Mark tie his shoes by the door, listening to him talk about his day, noticing the way he still reached for me without hesitation. It came when I folded his laundry, when I used his mug, when I caught him humming absent-mindedly while cooking dinner. He loved me without suspicion. That was the worst part. I started sleeping poorly. I woke up at odd hours, my chest tight, my thoughts looping. I rehearsed confessions I never intended to make. I imagined his face if he knew. I imagined leaving. I imagined staying. None of the futures felt survivable. Evan texted less during that week, and I was grateful and resentful at the same time. Grateful for the space. Resentful because the silence felt like withdrawal. When we finally saw each other again, it was accidental, or at least we pretended it was. I was leaving the office early one afternoon, my head pounding, my patience thin. He was coming in late, coffee in hand, distracted. We nearly collided in the hallway. We stopped. Looked at each other. Something unspoken passed between us. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. We went outside, the air cool and bright. We stood a little too close, like we hadn't learned anything. "I don't want to do this if it's hurting you," he said. I meant what I said. "I don't want to be something you regret." I swallowed. "You're not." That should have scared me more than it did. "What are we doing?" he asked. I shook my head. "I don't know. I just know I can't go back to pretending I'm fine." He looked at me for a long moment. "Neither can I." That was how it continued. Not as a whirlwind, but as a careful, terrible balance. We didn't meet often. We didn't talk constantly. But when we did, the connection was undeniable. Honest. Charged. And every time I went home afterward, I carried that weight with me. I became an expert at compartmentalizing. At switching versions of myself depending on where I was. At loving my husband and betraying him at the same time. It hollowed me out in ways I didn't expect. The aliveness I'd felt at first started to mix with anxiety. The clarity blurred. The excitement dulled at the edges, replaced by fear. Of being found out, of hurting Mark, of losing everything. And yet I couldn't stop. Because underneath all of it was a truth I hadn't yet faced. This wasn't just about Evan. It was about the life I'd been living. The parts of myself I'd buried. The voice I'd silenced long before another man ever touched me. One night, Mark asked me a question that nearly broke me. We were sitting on the couch, the TV on but neither of us watching. He turned to me and said gently, "Are you still happy here?" I felt the room tilt. "Yes," I said automatically. He nodded, satisfied. He leaned back. He trusted me. I went to bed early that night and cried into my pillow, silent and shaking. Because I was losing him in a way he couldn't see. And I was losing myself in a way I couldn't undo. By the time I realized the affair wasn't giving me life anymore, only postponing a reckoning, it was already woven into everything. And the question was no longer whether this could continue. It was whether I was brave enough to face what had to come next. Part 5. The truth presses back. There comes a point in every lie where it starts to rot from the inside. I didn't notice it at first. Rot is subtle. Smells like normal life for a while. It disguises itself as fatigue, as distance, as the dull ache you carry without naming. But one morning, standing in the bathroom brushing my teeth, I caught my own eyes in the mirror and didn't recognize them. They looked guarded. Not guilty. Not afraid. Just guarded. Like a woman who was bracing for impact she knew was coming but didn't know from which direction. That's when I understood. This couldn't stay contained. Not forever. Something had to give. Mark noticed the changes before I admitted them to myself. He started asking questions that weren't accusatory, just careful. Questions that circled instead of landed. "You've been quiet lately," he said one evening, rinsing dishes at the sink. "Are you sleeping okay? Did I do something?" Each one felt like a small cut. "No," I said to all of it. Too quickly. Too smoothly. He nodded every time, but something in his posture shifted. Like he was leaning forward now, paying attention. I hated myself for putting that vigilance in his eyes. At work, things with Evan grew heavier. Not more frequent, he was careful about that, but more intense. The stolen moments felt loaded now, less like escape and more like reckoning. One afternoon we sat in his car in a quiet side street, neither of us touching, neither of us pretending this was still light. "I can't keep doing this halfway," he said. "It's tearing you up." I stared out the window. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to decide," he said gently. "Not for me. For you." The word decide lodged in my chest. Between what and what? Between my marriage and my affair? That was the obvious framing, the one everyone expects. But that wasn't the real choice. The real choice was between continuing to disappear quietly or detonating the life I'd built to see what was underneath. I don't know how to choose without destroying someone, I said. He looked at me. You're already being destroyed. That sentence followed me home. That night Mark cooked dinner. He'd had a good day. He talked about a potential promotion, about plans for the future vacations, maybe a bigger place someday. His voice was warm with possibility. I smiled. I nodded. Inside, panic bloomed. Because the future he was imagining included a version of me who didn't exist anymore. After dinner, he poured us both a glass of wine and sat across from me at the table. He studied me for a moment longer than usual. Talk to me, he said. My heart stuttered. About what? About whatever you've been holding back. The room felt too quiet. Too bright. I don't know what you mean, I said, hating myself even as I did. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. I know you, he said softly. And you're not here lately. I don't know where you go, but I feel it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confess everything and nothing at the same time. Instead I said, I'm just struggling. With myself. He reached across the table and took my hand. Then let me help. That was the moment I almost broke. Because he meant it. Because he would have stayed. Because he would have tried. But trying would have meant admitting that the life we'd built, carefully, lovingly, was no longer enough to keep me alive. I don't think this is something you can fix, I whispered. He went still. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. What does that mean? He asked. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. I feel like I've been disappearing, I said. For a long time. His brow furrowed. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know how, I said. And then I didn't know how to stop pretending I was okay. He squeezed my hand. We can work through that. I looked at him and felt the truth press against my ribs, begging to be released. We can't work through this. Not together. Not the way things were. But I couldn't say it. Not yet. That night after he fell asleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan again. Just like I had months earlier, folding his laundry and crying without knowing why. Only this time I knew exactly why. I texted Evan. I think it's coming apart. He replied almost immediately. Do you want me to come over? I stared at the screen, heart racing. No, I typed. I need to do this sober. Awake. Alone. There was a pause. Whatever you decide, he wrote finally, I hope you choose yourself. I put my phone face down and cried silently beside my sleeping husband. Not because I was afraid of losing Evan, but because I was finally admitting that staying meant losing myself completely. Over the next week, the tension became unbearable. Mark was quieter now, watching me in that careful way people do when they sense something big approaching. I felt like a storm cloud walking through our house. One evening he said, I feel like I'm about to lose you. I swallowed hard. I'm still here. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The truth was pressing in from all sides now, demanding to be acknowledged. And I was running out of places to hide. Part 6. What survived the truth? I told him on a Sunday. Not because Sundays are symbolic, but because there were no distractions left. No work. No errands. No places to hide inside productivity. Just us. The house quiet. Coffee cooling on the table between us. Mark was reading the news on his phone when I said his name. The sound of my own voice startled me. It already knew what it was about to do. He looked up immediately. Yeah. I need to tell you something, I said. He set the phone down. Fully. Like he understood this wasn't a conversation you half attended. Okay, he said. Calm. Open. Still trusting. That trust was the hardest thing I've ever had to break. I sat across from him, hands wrapped around my mug so tightly my fingers hurt. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, in my ears, in the small space between my ribs where panic lives. I haven't been honest with you, I said. His face changed, not dramatically. Just enough. Like a shadow passed over it. About what? I closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, I didn't look away. I've been unhappy for a long time, I said. And I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't even know how to admit it to myself. He nodded slowly. I knew something was wrong. I should have talked to you, I continued. I should have trusted you with that. I didn't. And that's on me. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Is that all? No. My throat tightened. The room felt unbearably still. "There's more," I whispered. I watched the moment he understood not what but that something irreversible was about to be said. His jaw tightened. His hands clasped together. "Okay," he said quietly. "Tell me." I took a breath so deep it felt like it might crack me open. "I crossed a line," I said. "With someone else." The silence that followed was unlike anything I've ever experienced. Not loud. Not explosive. Empty. His face drained of color. His eyes didn't leave mine. "Crossed a line how?" he asked. This was the moment where people soften the truth. Where they choose words that blur instead of clarify. I didn't. I had an affair. The words landed between us like broken glass. He stared at me for a long time. So long I wondered if he hadn't heard me. Then he stood up. Not abruptly. Slowly. Like his body needed time to process what his mind already had. He walked to the window and stood there, hands on the sill, looking out at the quiet street. I didn't follow him. I didn't touch him. I didn't cry. I let the truth sit where it belonged. Finally he spoke. His voice was steady but thinner than I'd ever heard it. "How long?" "A few months." "Do you love him?" The question sliced straight through me. "No," I said immediately. "I never did." He turned slightly, looking at me over his shoulder. "Then why?" This was the question I'd been living inside for months. "Because I didn't feel alive," I said. "And I didn't know how to tell you that without destroying everything. I didn't go looking for someone else. I was trying to find myself." The words sounded selfish out loud. I knew that. I didn't dress them up. He turned fully then, pain written openly across his face now. "So you destroyed everything anyway?" he said. "Yes," I said. "I did." He laughed once, short, disbelieving. "I loved you," he said. "I still do." That broke me. I cried then. Quietly. Completely. "I know," I said. "That's what makes this unforgivable." He sank back into his chair, rubbing his face with his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red but dry. "Did you stop?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Before today. Before I told you." "Because you wanted to?" he asked. "Or because you were afraid of getting caught?" "Because I couldn't live with the lie anymore," I said. "And because it wasn't fixing what I thought it would." He nodded slowly. "What happens now?" he asked. I shook my head. "I don't know." And for the first time that answer was honest. The days that followed were quiet, brutal, surreal. We slept in separate rooms. We spoke when necessary. We cried separately. Sometimes together. There was anger, of course there was. Questions I answered. Questions he didn't want answers to. Moments where he looked at me like he didn't recognize me at all. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't deserve it. What I did ask for was honesty. Real honesty. The kind we should have had years ago. We went to counseling, not to save the marriage, at least not at first, but to understand how two people could love each other and still lose themselves so completely. Some things became painfully clear. Mark had loved me in the way he knew how. He'd built a life around safety and steadiness because that was what had saved him once. I had mistaken safety for suffocation because I'd never learned how to ask for more without feeling like I was asking for too much. Neither of us was a villain. That didn't undo the damage. After months of trying, of talking, of sitting in discomfort, of seeing each other clearly for the first time, we made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not a fight. A quiet one. We let each other go. The day I moved out, he hugged me for a long time. No anger left. Just grief. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said. "I hope you do too," I replied. And I meant it. It's been a year now. I live alone. I go to therapy. I've learned how to listen to myself before I disappear. I've learned how to speak when something feels wrong instead of swallowing it whole. I don't see Evan anymore. He was a chapter, not the story. Sometimes late at night, guilt still finds me. Sometimes I wonder if there was a version of this where no one got hurt. But I also know this. Cheating didn't make me alive. Truth did. Even when it cost me everything. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You can survive being honest far better than you can survive slowly disappearing. Even if honesty breaks your heart first.